Hello and welcome to a professional development video on creating and using rubrics for writing assignments. I'm Cheryl Duffus, I am your QEP director, and I'm going to be talking a little bit today about some general terms about rubrics so that we have a common language to talk about. I'm not going to get too much into the pedagogy and philosophy behind rubrics. Rather, I'm going to spend more time in the video showing and talking about examples of specific types of rubrics. For me, it's easier to just look at some concrete examples and to say, hey, I like this or I don't like this, and I'm going to steal this and adapt it for my class. So let's go ahead and get started. So you probably have contemplated these questions. If you're using rubrics, what do you like about rubrics, or what do you think could be improved? And if you don't use rubrics, then why not? You probably are at least open to the idea of using rubrics, or you wouldn't be watching this video. But I know there are some objections to rubrics, a feeling that, it's just too detailed, that, you shouldn't have to, I don't know, go into this much effort for a rubric, that it's just quantifying something that can't be quantified perhaps, that it's just playing into what students want in terms of having every single thing explained to them. There are lots of philosophical objections to rubrics. I will say I started using rubrics because I grew tired of having to explain to students why they had gotten the grade that they got on an essay. I've been teaching for 20 years, and every class I teach, I have essays in, and so I would have lots and lots of students coming to me, why did I get a B, why did I get a C, why didn't I get an A, all these kinds of questions. And once I started using rubrics, these conversations went away. And I felt that rubrics helped my communication to the students about why they got the grade they got. Whatever I did in my written comments was just not enough. It was not clear to students. And so I think anything I can do to improve communication and to stop having those kind of grade haggling conversations really just takes the stress out of my life. Also, I feel like having those grade conversations, it's like, well, I already spent all this time grading your essay. I don't really want to talk about it again. That's counterproductive. So that's the main thing I like about using rubrics, is that it communicates what I value about writing to students, and it hopefully shows them these are the areas that I can improve upon. So a student may get a rubric back and see that they got a C on it, and they may think, well, I really put a lot of creativity into this. I really thought about it. I thought I had great ideas. And they may look at my rubric and see, oh, my MLA documentation is terrible, and that cost me 2 letter grades. So maybe it's worth my while to look into this. Or the reverse, they may have great marks on grammar and documentation, but maybe their thesis statement wasn't even a thesis statement. It was not an argument. And that may be an indication to them, I'm not understanding how to do this. I'm missing a main component of the assignment. And so to me, I hope that my rubrics will communicate in more detail what a student's strengths and weaknesses are with their writing. I do think, you probably have your own problems with rubrics. I do feel like my rubrics, and I've corrected this in the past year, but for several years before this year, I had this kind of nagging feeling that my rubrics were inflating grades, that my grades were just too high. Part of this, I think, was not really understanding how to use rubrics on Turnitin, which I've stopped doing. And part of it was I just needed to use a different type of rubric. And through my research for this type of professional development and for the QEP, I have fixed my problem. And now my grades are lower. So talking about terminology with rubrics, there are some just general terms we should all learn. One are these different options for rubrics. So you can have an analytic rubric versus a holistic rubric, and I'll get to definitions of this, a generic versus task-specific, and a grid versus a no grid. So you may think, oh, rubric, it has to be this grid or a chart. You can have a rubric that's not like that. So if that doesn't float your boat, then you don't have to do it. So an analytic rubric is a lot what I was talking about before, and that's where it takes each criteria of the assignment or grade and has a rubric that in your rubric, there's a row that addresses each one of these. So quality of ideas, organization, use of evidence, documentation, however you, whatever the components or criteria are for the assignment, you would want to put each one on the rubric, and then you decide which one, how many points each of these components get, or what percentage of the grade, or however you'd like to do it. A holistic rubric has just one score. So it might be from A to F, it might be from 10 to 1, it's whatever you would like. I've seen all kinds of different ways of thinking about it. And a holistic score emerges from the belief that writing skills are all bound up together. So if you don't have a good focus or thesis statement, then you're not going to have good organization, because that's what should control everything else. And so how can you separate out organization? Or that if you, I don't know, if you're using evidence wrongly or badly, that's going to also address your documentation style. So I think there is some validity to this, that writing skills are interrelated. And if I run into this all the time when I'm looking at the QEP rubric. I think all these things are interrelated. Context and purpose, it is part of disciplinary writing. How can we separate these things out? So, you know, I see the belief behind this. However, I do think that if you have a holistic rubric, you really need to give a very detailed explanation of each score, just to avoid having these conversations that I personally find to be a time suck. With rubrics, you can also think about whether you would like a generic rubric. That means a generic rubric for writing would fit any writing assignment that you gave. For me, this is somewhat problematic because I teach freshmen all the way to graduate students, and I hold seniors and graduate students to a much higher level than I do first semester freshmen. So, you know, I don't want to kill their little 18-year-old souls. So, you know, it would be hard for me to have a generic rubric. I guess I could and then just change the scoring or something. But generic would mean that no matter what type of writing assignment you gave, it would be a one-size-fits-all. Task specific would be tailored to a certain type of assignment. So I would have one for annotated bibs, one for, you know, literary analysis, one for, you know, their thesis, whatever. And again, you can use a grid or you don't have to use a grid. So right now it's going to be helpful to just go to Blackboard and show you some examples. If you are watching this video, you are already on our Blackboard org, and you can click back there. You can see that I've got the PowerPoint that I just showed you is up, as well as 2 folders with sample rubrics. The first one is a link within the organization, and this just has some sample rubrics from 2 organizations. So I will go ahead and pull these up here. AAC&U is the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and they have what are known as their value rubrics. These are pretty, I don't know if popular, well-known would be a better way of describing it. And I gave you all of them here, not just the writing one. It's everything from civic engagement to writing. There's also an oral communication one in here. There's one on ethical reasoning, critical thinking, reading. There's one on teamwork. So if you've had problems assessing group work or teamwork, this might be a model that will help you. But what they have done is these are actually really good examples of generic rubrics. They have created generic rubrics for different types of assignments and shared them with the rest of us. So if you go all the way down to the bottom, you can see that there's a written communication value rubric. And if you have encountered the QEP rubric, you will see there are a lot of similarities. And that's because AAC&U gave us permission to use the rubric as a model to build ours upon. So they're very nice people. So if you look here, you can see that a lot of the language from our student learning outcomes and also from the QEP rubric show up here, as well as this idea of rating something from a 4 down to a 1. So we did steal a lot of their philosophy. As you can see, each little square here is defined. And if you have not done this before, you may be looking at this and thinking, oh, this just looks really horrible. But it is hard to do the very first time that you do it, but once you've done it once, you can copy a lot of these from one rubric to another and adapt them and so forth. And I have had a lot of positive student feedback from a detailed rubric like this. And again, I think it's my obligation to communicate as best as I can with students. So the first time you do it, it's time consuming and annoying and probably not the kind of thing that my brain most loves to do, but the detail just really helps out the students. Let's see, the next organization I have a few examples from is the National Council of Teachers of English. You may be thinking, I'm not a teacher of English, this is useless, I can't learn anything from this. But these are very generic rubrics. They can easily be adapted for any discipline, I think. So there's one on essays. Again, it's a lot like the AAC and U one, and we had looked at this one too when creating the QEP rubric. So again, I think all this stuff is just very generic writing things you could easily adapt. They also have one that's specifically on a persuasive or argumentative assignment. And then they have one on oral presentations. And I always struggle with that because I feel like oral presentations are something I'd probably grade too easy as well. So this might give you some language or some ways of thinking about how to evaluate an oral presentation. So that is all from other people. I also have some sample rubrics, two that are from two of my own classes, two English classes, and then a bunch of them from a book by John Bean called Engaging Ideas, which is really one of the better books I have read on teaching. It's very practical. It is very low on theory and pedagogy, which, you know, I need a little bit of that. I need tell me what to do. Show me how to use this in my classroom. And he just is very down to earth and practical. It's in its second edition. And I think we have it in our library if you want to check it out there. So let's take a look at some of his rubrics because he's the one who really helped me figure out how to fix my rubrics. I'm very sorry. This PDF here this is the only page that is like this. Trust me, or I would have scanned it in a much better way. But this is an example of a generic writing rubric using the analytic method. So it's generic, one size fits all, and it's analytic because you can see the different categories right here at the bottom of the page: content, organization, vocabulary, voice, sentences, conventions. And so he goes from does not meet all the way up to exceeds. So he has 6 different criteria. And again, you can see how, like a good doobie, he has filled in every single little square here. And he credits Read, Write, Think org, which NCTE also participates in. If you want to go to that Read, Write, Think org, they have some really good stuff. And here he's provided also an example of a generic rubric using the holistic method. So again, it goes from a 1 to a 6, and he defines the assignment summary writing, and it looks like a summary of an article. So probably something longer than an annotation. And he tells you the criteria. You have to have accurate content, comprehensive, balance, clarity, readability, and grammatical correctness. So here you can see that he defines all what these scores mean. And I think you do need to go into this much detail for students, or you're just gonna have a lot of annoying conversations. And you're not communicating accurately. And students don't know how to improve, which should be the point. They should be able to look at these things and make what's weak better. Here he has this task-specific rubric for something called a practical proposal. Now, I put this one up here because I really like how he's got kind of like A, B plus range right here, 10, 9, 8. I think that's kind of neat to it gives a sense of flexibility. This is still the top, but you know, maybe one person's an 8 and one person's a 10. I kind of like that. It's saying you're still really good. You're still kind of at the top, but there are some things you could do, you know, to still become a 10. I think, and also here too, you know, you're in the middle. Sometimes we feel like that, this grade, B, C, I don't know, you know, this gives you some flexibility here to say maybe in some places, you know, but they're not at the bottom. This is the person who, you know, the assignment is just not meeting the criteria. So this is just another way of thinking about grades and how to evaluate writing. Here's one for a graphics assignment. If you have any questions about how to evaluate visual things, this might be helpful for you. And then here is a non-grid. And this is, you just break it down into the different things. 20 points is the language, sentences, etc. So that's how you do a non-grid. Here's something, a sample. Oh, this is from a different book, Student Writing in the Quantitative Disciplines by Patrick Balls. I highly recommend this if you are in natural sciences or mathematics. And this is, I have no idea about statistics, but here's a sample rubric. And that is the end of that. Now, I pulled up these John Bean rubrics also because I learned from him the thing that has helped to change my grading. And this is that at the end of his rubric, he has a deduction for stuff like noise, grammar, punctuation, usage, or spelling. And I discovered that this was my problem. Turnitin does not allow for a deduction. Everything is just part of the grade. And however I was setting up my rubrics there, it just was not penalizing students enough for the errors that they were making. And a lot of it was, not that they made 1 or 2 errors, but just a lot of really sloppy errors and just really bad use of documentation. And I know that we all have different value around proper documentation, but you know what? An English professor, I really want that MLA to be pretty much perfect. So I will I like to be able to penalize students who aren't paying attention to details like that. Because I think it carries over into the workplace and one's ability to do things thoroughly and to pay attention to details and to do the annoying parts of one's job and not just worrying about the fun parts. And that's how I think about documentation. So anyway, he has a deduction for rule-based errors, and he calls them either positive ethos. So that's a nice way to think about errors and explaining them to students, is that, you're ruining your vibe with me, your credibility with me, your ethos. Annoying noise or errors that are destroying you. I'm a little more specific here. He also has some language on his last page right here about specifying levels of achievement. So if that's something you have a hard time with, we can't say you stink for the last one. You can find some language here that conveys what you mean in a nicer way. So here's an example of 2 rubrics from classes that I have taught, and I think I meant to put up one more. Oh, I did, from an annotated bib, and I will get that over here. Sorry, I've got it in 2 different places. Here, yeah. Yes, here is a rubric. Here's an example of a rubric that I use with seniors in their upper level class. It's the research class for their senior thesis. So in the first semester, they research the topic that they want to write on and figure out what their argument's going to be, and they write a lot of annotated bibs. And these are the students where I'm really grumpy if they don't have really good grammar and mechanics and really good MLA documentation, because I feel they've had lots of exposure to this. They are English majors. They should be penalized. This is something that they need to be doing well. So you can see the criteria of my assignment. They have to write a summary of the source. They have to evaluate it in terms of how effectively the source is making its point, how well organized it is. They have to talk about how they might use the source in their project, what contribution it's making, and they have to compare the source to other sources that they have found. And let me tell you, there are lots of people who do these first 3 things well, and they don't even do the 4th thing. This is why I have a 0 in all of my rubrics, because nothing irritates me more than students just electing not to do part of an assignment. Again, I'm trying to cultivate good habits for them to take into their careers. So I have this 0, and this is the great equalizer. This is what separates out the students who are going the extra mile and doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it's letting students know that you're not doing this, and this is actually a really important part of the assignment. Then I have my deduction. So I have everything from a 1-point deduction for just some minor errors to perhaps a 3.5 deduction for major and more than 4 major or minor errors. Now, I will tell you that this assignment is worth 25 points. So a deduction of 3.5 points is quite significant. And there were lots of students who, we do this assignment, I think 5 different times, and the first couple, they're getting pretty bad deductions, and then it gets better. So again, this is just something I feel they need to be paying more attention to. Now, if we go back here to, and this one is back on our org, and I'll put that other one up there. It's from, this next one is from a English 252 class I teach. It's a survey of world literature. This is a gen ed class. This is really should be called Introduction to Literature. Most of these students haven't really written about literature before. So this is from a final exam that they did. And you can see how I value everything there. And I actually don't have a deduction right there for these students. I think it's, yeah, I don't have anything at all. And that was kind of the old way I thought about it. This is from a literature class for majors. So the students were mainly juniors, I think, juniors and seniors. And it's the same thing here. I have everything broken down by the criteria of the assignment. And then I have the deductions for MLA, 2 different categories, because this is an assignment worth 100 points. In the annotated bib, where it was only worth 25 points, I just had 1 MLA. So the formatting of the document, as well as the formatting of the citations, 3, and the works cited page. Like I said, you know, I'm picky. And then 1 for grammar, punctuation, mechanics, etc. You can see here that I'm a little more, I think, lenient. I think here, you know, you have to get more, you have possibility for up to 6 points. It is a 100-point assignment, but I'm a little more easy on the errors. So again, I think that pretty much changed my life, changing to that type of rubric. So my task to you now, I don't really have any more wisdom to share with you, just that you need to think about what kind of rubric you would like to do. So what have you seen in these examples that you like, that speaks to you as an instructor? What do you see that you would never do? I would love to be the person who could do this holistic grading, because I feel like it would be quicker, but I can't pull it off. And think about, you know, how might you modify any of these examples for your own assignments? How might you revise your own rubric or design a new one? So hopefully this has been helpful in giving you some examples and possibilities. If you have any questions or if you have any follow-up, I would be happy to talk to you or meet with you. You know how to contact me. I'd be happy to take a look at a rubric with you. That would be fine. So good luck.